I think when Durkheim chose his topic, he was less concerned about suicide or suicide prevention than he was about... What? Huh? Wait a minute. I thought it said something about rape culture down there. What's all this suicide stuff? Well, I'll answer you. It says, The Woman with 1.5 Hands, Part 12, Rape Culture. Part 12, that's the key ingredient. If you haven't already viewed the original, The Woman with 1.5 Hands, I'm going to suggest you do so now. Then watch Part 2, and then Part 3, etc., etc. And we'll see you back here in a little while. Anyway, here's Part 12, or Rape Culture. I think when Durkheim chose his topic, he was less concerned about suicide or suicide prevention than he was about dissecting and analyzing a certain kind of crime that would showcase just what sociology is, what it can be used for, how it's different from other fields, and how, as a standalone science, it's just as legitimate as any other science one would study at any college or university. Yes, during the 19th century, suicide was on the rise, but, for instance, so was murder. The thing about a crime like murder is that the punishment-ocentric among us can, and often do, get all up in arms over it and start spanking away. And if those murder rates keep going up, they seem to want to spank harder, and often that's what they do. When dealing with Durkheim's crime, on the other hand, at one point these spankaholics look down and say, "Wow, he's already dead, and my arm's tired." Translated, Durkheim noted that various far-flung governments throughout history have tried different punitive measures, i.e. spankings, to deal with the crime of suicide, like taking inheritances from heirs, or by disallowing suicides to be buried in the more honored cemeteries. So far, nothing's worked. People still commit suicide. Point being, when the victim and the perp of a crime are the same person, some punishers start to look around the courtroom. Here's a crime, they might think, where it's not going to help to sit at either the defense attorney's table or the prosecuting attorney's table. In other words, and if you'll allow me to complete this analogy, it may or may not help to sing songs around the campfire with and or hug a particular criminal. The thing is, though, as far as the person who committed Durkheim's crime goes, it doesn't help to hug that criminal at all, no matter how hard or affectionately you hug. 'Cause he's dead. Durkheim, on purpose, chose to examine a crime that readers of his book, as they progress through its pages, eventually find themselves donning judges' robes or sitting in the juror's box. Which is to say, we can't ignore or discount the whole other half of why something happens. Can't just blow it off. Not with this crime. One manifestation of how this relates to rape prevention is that a judge or a member of a jury would have a different opinion of what it means to add to a rape culture than a certain kind of lawyer would have. A lawyer greatly influenced by the anti-rape industrial complex, in other words, a lawyer steeped in TARICO mentality, might suggest for men witnessing this trial that if they want to make our society less conducive to rape, that they should try to discourage other men from raping. Say I'm in the gallery. I don't really get that many chances to talk to middle or upper class men, which is to say, I don't get many chances to converse with the men who get away with raping the most. And if this is new to you, you've been hitting that fast forward button a little too often. Or this is, like I mentioned earlier, one of those mashup things, something that was mirrored, but only partially mirrored, whatever. If I were to talk against rape in an accusatory manner to a middle-class man, whom, again, I never saw rape, because, again, I've never seen anyone rape, he'd be offended, or laugh in my face, or tell me to get out of his bedroom. And a member of the 1%? I couldn't get near one, never have. And if I did, his posse or retinue would shoo me away before I got to within preaching distance. Not that I've ever preached, because I haven't. But I'm guessing that preaching is what TARICO brass want those of us who are men and are against rape to do when we spot some man from the middle or near the top. Like we're supposed to shout at him, "That's not a trophy, dude, that's a wife." Or something to that effect. Gotta calm down here. Dude, get her off of your mantelpiece. She's not a trophy. Other examples of how TARICO is tragically missing the point to follow. But first, a rebuttal of sorts. This from either a prosecution-oriented or a defense-oriented person, and having to do with a period when coddling or hugging still might take place, right before the suicide. It's then that this soon-to-off-herself person can still be hugged meaningfully, but shouldn't be spanked necessarily, well, because no crime has yet been committed. The problem with hugging at that moment in time is that true suicides, before they die, are hard to spot. Many on the ledge don't jump. More women who intentionally ingest lethal doses of sleeping pills have their stomachs pumped than complete the act. And, as Durkheim found, depression rates and suicide rates don't necessarily coincide. Okay, how about everybody gets a hug? I mean, they're free, right? Durkheim actually did address this issue, believe it or not. What he said about education, and here I want to make sure that my metaphor is not getting lost somewhere along the way. I think, though I could be wrong, that the more punishment-ocentric among us conceptualize nearly all education-oriented and or prevention-oriented solutions as hugging and coddling criminals. And yes, suicide is a crime. To these punishers, anything more than jaywalking? Yep, time for the electric chair. Here, let me strap you in. To people like me, on the other hand, education and prevention solves problems more efficiently and often before they happen, and has nothing to do with literally hugging criminals. Prevention-oriented stuff, nothing at all to do with literally hugging criminals. But anyway, okay, how about everybody gets a hug? I mean, they're free, right? I.e., public education is free, public service announcements on the tube or the radio free, etc. So what Durkheim said about education was that educators could try faking it for a while, and maybe even with limited, very limited success, but that if the underlying causes of suicide weren't addressed, look for rates to pretty much continue unabated. The thing is, though, it wasn't that Durkheim didn't care about those who committed suicide. And yes, when tripled, suicide rates are even more disheartening. Getting closer to the crux, but not there yet, happens when one recalls that, even when tripled, suicide is still usually measured in incidents per 100,000, in part because of how rarely it happens. For instance, say the rate increases from 12 to 3 dozen per 100,000 people. That's still way fewer than 1%. Yes, if your sister or father is taken, it feels like it's 100%. I mean, you got hit. You're in pain. And your loss is not beside the point. It's just that Durkheim was multitasking. Sure, he was looking for ways to curb or reverse runaway suicide rates, but he was also concerned with first identifying the conditions associated with this tripling, and then showing that these conditions negatively affect others around those who off themselves, and not only those who off themselves. To elucidate this point, here's a recent example. Since around 2004, suicide in the U.S. military has tremendously increased, at least compared to what it was in the 90s. It's quadrupled or so. More details in my appendix. Durkheim noted that the military in particular is an organization that just about replenishes itself, i.e. changes personnel nearly completely every few years. The military takes in all kinds of personalities, and these same personalities who commit suicide at much lower frequencies elsewhere just happen to start offing themselves more after becoming soldiers. Particularly curious, and or what might lead to maniacal head-scratching or trichotillomania, is Durkheim's example of soldiers, after completing their obligations, thus free to go home, first voluntarily re-enlisting, only to later kill themselves, and get this, kill themselves at the same rates as other soldiers. If they were so unhappy with military life, and or if unhappiness truly goes hand in hand with suicide, why did they opt to re-up? Anyway, Durkheim wrote that this says something about the institution itself, rather than any one suicidal soldier. When suicide rates within an insular institution skyrocket, that's when everyday life in that institution for everybody, not just the few who kill themselves, needs to be re-examined, because obviously something is amiss. As this video ends, we now have a toehold on another principle that is transferable to rape prevention. This principle will be pinned down shortly. So there you have it. What's in the future? Part 13. Or a rape prevention principle? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Anyway, that's for next time.